Hey everyone, Christine and Colin here. We are doing a little finishing on a fired clay as ceramic sculpture. So this is called Dove Dreams of Flying. And again, she is fired clay. She was built at about 60% life size and has shrunk about 10 to 12%. What Colin is doing is he's laying down a base coat. You can see that the clay came out of the kiln and it's kind of this buff tan color, which is pretty common for sculpture clay bodies. And we had a long discussion this morning. We've been thinking about this for some time, but we had a long discussion about the direction that we wanted to take her. And we oftentimes respond to what the kiln did. So you can see the tan color, but there was also some of these white little kisses of color that just were how it fired. And so we're choosing to enhance that. Our plan right now is that we're going to be going whiter down here on the bottom and coming up into warmer tones up at the top. We're going to kind of feel our way through the development of this. So we're thinking that we might give a little tiny hint of pinks and natural coloration without actually what we call paint by numbers. We don't like to paint the lips red and all of that, but having a hint of it we like. We may actually go into a little bit of blue, kissing a little bit of blue up here on the top of the wings, just because it's a reference to the sky. And we're trying to use the coloration on the sculpture to enhance the narrative or the story. So there's a couple of things that we do frequently. We oftentimes will have a white to more of a golden or warm tan transition because it's almost as if the sculpture is coming to life. That would be the case here too. So it's kind of as if Dove starts to engage in her dreams. She's coming into life, and so she gets a little warmer up here on the top. Or if she is in fact in some way turning into a bird, to kind of match along with Zozo the dove here, you'll have this little bit of white. So it could be interpreted that way as well. We oftentimes have our own kind of a rough story about what's happening and let the viewers actually make up their own kind of a story then. So what Colin is doing, this is acrylic paint. It's golden acrylic. You probably can see some of the jars in the background there.
So what I've done here with the airbrush, this is a jam gun. It's a small spray gun, not an airbrush, but it's gravity feed. So we're putting the fluid, the paints in the top, and we're coming down here. And I've turned the air way down so that I can get this splatter pattern, which is what I'm looking for. I don't want it to look airbrushed. I want it to have more of a textured feel. So when we look at what the clay does naturally, there are lots of little colorations and lots of little speckles in there. So I'm going to try and enhance that. And that's why you don't see like just an even tone. You see these little light speckles. And I'm going to slowly build this up. This is going to take many hours to get to where we're going with it. And as Christine said, we're feeling our way through it. But you'll see with the pattern of this that it's just little speckles. So this is going to be the base coat or the primer coat, if you will. And we're just adding and accentuating these colorations. And we're not quite sure where she's going to head, other than we like the idea of her being nice and white and sort of coming into being, because that's a little bit of what the kiln suggested we do. And so we're going to follow that suggestion. It's just the random nature of the fire in the kiln decided that the lower part was going to be slightly whiter. So we're going to think that's pretty neat, and we're going to move forward with that.
We're also being quite cautious since we are spraying paint, and that can be a dangerous activity. So you notice that Colin is wearing his respirator. And
we've made sure that we're looking for the AP non-toxic here before we're spraying any of this. Anything that doesn't have this AP or doesn't have any of the other, there are a couple different codes. Let's see if I can find a second one. That's another one. It's a code for how toxic it is. Some of them will have that non-toxic, but also say specifically, do not spray. And I'm not sure if I can grab, here's one. It says AP non-toxic, but do not spray. So we're not going to spray it. We'll put all that on by hand. Titanium is a pretty benign, very common mineral. It's one of the most common pigments out there. And yet I'm still going to wear a face mask just to make sure, just for a little bit of safety. You can see the spray isn't really, it's not atomizing in the whole studio. It's settling very quickly right here. Not sure if you can see right here, but I'm going to try and just show you. With more pressure, it becomes more like what we're used to with airbrush. But if we turn the pressure way down, then we get these splatter patterns. And the further down I turn it, I can get some very large splatter patterns. So this is what we're looking for, is something right in here. And we're reducing this a fair amount, not enough to add an extra medium, but just so that we can get these translucent qualities to the pigment.
So you don't have to have an airbrush to be able to do that splatter technique. People have done very large sculptures using toothbrushes, but we also use this. It's just a vegetable brush. You can get it on Amazon, and you put the paint on there and you're just manually doing this, and it makes a splatter pattern, which is what we're looking for. And we will probably, after Colin has established the base coat, the splatter pattern, we're going to keep refining layer after layer after layer and adding more complexity in the colors. So this is just trying to move the base coat along a bit more effectively. We don't ever actually use fired finishes like glazes. We tried a fair bit of that at the start, and we found that they, for one thing, if you can imagine a glaze, will go into all of this detail and obscure it, which is annoying at best.
We found it often looked like you've just you spent all this time creating this surface and you've just dipped it in cream. And so it wipes out all of that, which can look very beautiful in a pot. For a sculpture, we prefer to have very, very thin surface treatments so that does not happen and we don't lose any of this lovely texture.
So you could use underglazes and stains. That would be fired finishes. But we found that for us, fired finishes can be a bit unpredictable. So of course you do a lot of testing, a lot of firing to determine what it's going to do in your particular kiln and the way that you particularly fire.
We spent weeks making sure that it would turn into this really nice rustic pewter sort of tarnished silver. It looked really metallic but tarnished. We loved it. And it came out successful again and again and again. And we did maybe 12 sculptures with it. It all turned out to be sort of pea green. It was total loss with all the sculptures. It was really unfortunate.
And the other thing that we like about the cold finishes is that as long as we don't goop a bunch of paint on there and get it all shiny, because we don't like shiny finishes either, we like matte, because it maintains the quality and feeling of how clay is. We can keep adding layers, tiny, thin layers and layers and layers until we actually get exactly the surface, exactly the transition that we want on a piece. And we like to have that kind of control. So it does mean that you do have to develop a certain amount of ability with paint and paint materials, or you need to marry somebody who has those abilities. So a lot of our sculptures are collaborative, and sometimes, well, people always ask about how we do our collaborations, and sometimes it's really 50-50 where we both sit down and we're hashing out what the concept is together, and we're actually both working on the sculpture at the same time. Sometimes one of us is what we call the principal. So one of us has taken the conceptual lead and the other jumps in and helps with either process or actually jumping in and helping out with sculpting. So he's bringing that white all the way up, and then when he adds the next color tone, more of a tan tone, he'll start bringing it back down again a little bit. This is a sculpture Colin just brought out. This is called Golden Lotus, and this is another ceramic sculpture made with the same clay body. And she was finished using the same technique. We were using a lot of this vegetable brush to establish the base layers, and then we're using little tiny paint brushes and dabbing. You can see that on one of the earlier posts. I did a little time lapse of finishing this. And Colin had the idea on this one to have her replicate the color of a lotus from a picture that he had that had these really wonderful pinky orange colors, and the tips of the petals were kissed with that red color, and then going down into the green of the leaves. And we wanted to have this sense of a glow radiating from underneath. We can't show you the underside because Instagram will censor us. But her tummy, if you can imagine, is quite a bright, distinctive orangey gold. And we wanted that feeling of that gold color to kind of be like a radiating, glowing light coming up.
And one of the things when we were talking about complexity of the surface and the coloration, I'm not sure how much of the camera will be able to pick this up, but there are a lot of different colors in here. It's not just one or two colors. There are several in here, and every section of it has many different colorations. So this is when we're talking about here, we're just starting the basics on the big sculpture of just blocking it in, and here we're getting all of the complexity. She's not going to be this kind of vibrant, but she is going to have that kind of complexity in the surface.
We did want, because this larger sculpture, Dove Dreams of Flying, we both agree, has a very soft and dreamlike quality, both in the method of sculpting and the choice of pose and what the narrative, the story about her is. It's all a very kind of soft, based on memory and dreaming and all of these things. And so we wanted her finish not to be super vibrant. We feel that the finish can very much enhance what the story of the sculpture is. So that the experience of looking at her might be something that's a little bit more introspective, a little bit quieter.
We're also going to make sure that once this is blocked in, the majority of it is going to be done by hand with brushes and just tiny stippling, but that takes an enormous amount of time. So the initial layer, this is why I'm using the spray gun, just to lay down some color, get some pigment on the surface, and then we will push this either in whatever direction we wish later on. But this won't all be done with this spray.
And the reason we don't generally like airbrush look on a sculpture is that it tends to just kind of hit the higher parts, and so it doesn't want to go down into the recesses. And
it often looks very airbrushy.
It looks very airbrushy, and that's a very distinctive taste.
The color I was putting in, which is this right here, is very close to the actual color of the clay. So I started with the white, moving up. Now I'm starting with this tan color. This it's a yellow ochre moving down. But the difference between the actual color and the coloration here is almost imperceptible. So we're going to be pushing this back and forth just until we get to a coloration that we like. And there are going to be things that happen as we go along that will catch our eye and we will enjoy and think, like, for example, right in here, it's a little bit warmer. It's a little bit warmer in here under the arms, and that may be something that we decide, okay, let's accentuate that. Let's have it glow from the inside going up. So this will lead us in directions and we will follow.
So I have done a number of sculptures where we basically stopped about here. Okay, where it's just a basic transition from white up to tan. It's very sculptural. It maintains the quality and feeling of clay. We like that. Even though we're adding paint on top of it, we like there to be a sense of what the actual material is, and we like that in our bronze sculptures too. One of the things we're very careful about in whether it's clay or bronze, is if we put white and we just stopped it right there, it looked like she was wearing tights. Or if you stop it at her knee or mid-thigh, it will look like she's wearing socks. And we don't want to do that. We want to have this very soft transition, just like the forms of the body have a very soft transition from one part of the body to another. We want to have a very soft transition between the different colors, and it's something to think about if you are sculptors in your own work and you're doing some kind of a transitional finish. You can do the transitions on diagonals. You'll see that a lot on Collins bronzes.
Then we went in, and although we really liked how the overall feel of it, we decided we wanted to get more complexity, and so we started putting things like blues in here. And even though it's buried in amongst the other colors, and it's very hard to see it, it is part of the
little
layering.
tiny dots of the cerulean here.
And we put more of a hint of blue underneath here, and then covered it up with white. And again, you just see a tiny bit of it peeking through.
And we do that because we like to have there be a certain complexity of color. So if you're looking from further away, you get a overall impact of what the coloration is in the transition. But if somebody's going to actually come up and engage with the sculpture more closely, we want there to be interest in the surface, that you can look and you can see all of these different colors and layers happening. We added just a little tiny bit of a rosy blush on the cheeks and the lips, and the hands, the knees, the bottoms of the feet, the knuckles, just so that there's a little nod to realism without actually going and painting it. Somebody's saying it almost looks like blue from the veins, and that's actually really interesting that you've observed that, because Colin started putting a little speckles of blue in the white areas, and we found that it created something that's a little bit more interesting, but also perhaps realistic, because you're absolutely right. We do actually see blue from the veins, and skin is not flesh toned. Skin is many colors.
And it also subdued the intensity of the ochre color.
I'm going to show you the palette we've been using. So all of the pinks are coming from a combination of quinacridone crimson. We've been mixing that with cadmium yellows and white, of course. And what we're doing on the palette is, we're using a lot of yellow ochre.
Yellow ochre and titanium white are a huge portion of it as well.
So when we're doing it, we're not taking like that pure pigment. We're always taking a little bit of the pigment and a little bit of this and mixing it somewhere else. And we're not worrying about if it mixes in with some of the other colors, because most of these were things that were used. The greens you're seeing here were from the previous piece, a Golden Lotus. But we're not worrying, because most of these colors are somewhere in that piece. And we don't want to have exactly this color and go dot, 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 same color. We want to go dot, dot, grab a little bit of something a little different, dot, 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 something different, dot, dot, dot. And we're literally sometimes working with a brush this size, the brush that Colin works with.
This right here is one of my favorite crappy brushes, but it's splayed enough that it provides a lot of tiny little dots in one pass.
Can you take a dark color and show the mark it makes?
Sure.
And this is the one that I am predominantly using, which is equally messed up, but it makes a lovely stipple pattern. So you can see how the splayed bristles create a random stipple, and you notice as he's stippling, he's turning the brush, so he's not going stipple, 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 stipple. He's doing stipple and turn.
Yeah, that slight rotation makes it harder for your eye to pick up. Like here you go, okay, that's a stamp pattern. But as I rotate it just a little bit, it becomes less so. And we have smaller versions of crummy brushes, which are brushes we actually treasure, and that can get into just tinier recesses when we need to.
And for most of this particular piece, even when we were mixing the colors, we weren't using that as pure pigment. We're actually adding a fair bit of water, so almost more like a watercolory thing. And then oftentimes we'll dab it on here to take a little bit off the brush, and then actually go on to the sculpture, because we're trying to have the marks be almost a bit translucent. So we're just building up these tiny, tiny, tiny layers of colors. And what it's allowed us to do is to keep shifting subtly. So the way Colin describes it is, he says we're going to sneak up on what we want. So in the beginning, we knew that we wanted it to be whiter on the bottom and tanner on the top because of what the kiln was doing and what our particular tastes are. And then we weren't sure if we talked earlier this morning about potentially going blue here, and we went blue down here. And so we decided that wasn't going to work. And then we started adding a little bit of the blushes in these different areas we talked about. And we look and see, is that working? And then we step back and we look from further away. And one of the things that we do like to do is we take pictures and roundabouts in the process and look at how it looks on the camera. Because oftentimes it will look, you'll get some good information. So earlier there was a little swath of white that was kind of coming out this way that didn't quite go with what was going on here, and it was conflicting with what I was seeing going on in her face. And neither of us had seen it when we were just looking, but when I looked at it through the phone, the camera, I could totally see that that was going on. So we always take information from the phone, as well as standing back and coming up very close and trying to look at it from different angles.
We also, not only one of us will stand across the room, maybe on this side, and the other one will spin it very slowly and see if anything catches our eye. And then they'll stand on the other side where the lighting's a little bit different. And when we're almost done, we'll take it into another room and we'll look at it in a different lighting scenario and just see, does something catch our eye? Does everything feel cohesive? Is there anything we need to pay attention to? Any of the little details to it?
So he's going to give her a little bit of a spin. And we've just been sneaking up on the little changes. And so what Colin was doing this whole time when we were talking is we wanted to just shift this part of the hair into, again, just slightly darker. So we're not just going in and slamming, raw umber all over everything. We're trying to take everything little tiny steps at a time, build it up, because it allows us to assess where we are and to make shifts. And we could make dramatic shifts if we wanted to, but then we don't have to correct a mistake. We just kind of keep building. If we decided we wanted it to go darker, that's always easy to do. Sean Campbell is asking, will you use a sealer?
No, on this we will not. And sealers are an interesting concern. This is it's acrylic paint. It's very stable. Anybody who's used acrylic paint and you find that weeks later you still have some of it stuck on your nail, you think, okay, this is more durable than you'd imagine. The problem with sealers is they can shift the overall gloss of the piece. And we've done that intentionally. If something gets too glossy, we will use a sealer which we'll spray it. We'll use the same jam gun that we were using earlier today, and we'll spray it at a distance and try and matte the surface out if there's areas that have gotten too glossy, or if we want the reverse, where we want to hit some highlights that have some sheen on it, then we'll do that as well. But generally, as far as stability is concerned, this is great for any indoor situation. If this was going outdoors, that becomes a whole different conversation.
This piece is going to Modern Eden Gallery in San Francisco for a show curated by Beautiful Bizarre magazine out of Australia called Halcyon Days. And the opening is November 5th from 6 to 9, I believe. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.